Honored guests, I request you to take your seat, please. We are about to start our next session. Alun Sugo Rikobaya, and good afternoon to you all. The title of our next session is Refugee Crisis Across the World, the Fate of Millions in Limbo. The speakers are Irfan Yar, founder and managing director, Afghanistan Security Institute, Canada. Jan Janowski, Charge d'Affaires, Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Bangladesh. Karen Smith, professor, Leiden University, South Africa. Raja Devashish Roy, Chief, Chakma Circle, Bangladesh, and as moderator, Tawhid Hussain, former Foreign Secretary, Bangladesh. I request the speakers and moderators of this session to take your places on the stage. Thank you. And it's up to you now, moderator, Mr. Tawhid Hussain.
Get ready for our photos. Get ready for a photo shoot.
Moderator, Mr. Tawhid Hussain, sir, I already hand over to you the floor.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an excellent panel sitting here, and I'm sure that we will be listening to very illuminating speeches from them. Our session, subject of this session is, as you know, a refugee crisis across the world, the fate of millions in limbo. It is said that the history of the world is basically a history of migration. Let us not confuse between migration and refugees. But the thing is that in earlier times, many of the migrations took place for reasons that today the refugees leave their country for those same reasons, which are basically some sort of pressure, security, physical security, economic problem, and questions of domination, race, religion, and many other things. We have all along had refugees in our history, but then in the modern days, in earlier days, the issue was that those who had left their country, the world was wide open. They shifted their entire community and just took up their residence in some other country. And they just remained there for the rest of their lives and for generations. The problem today is that we do not have that facility for the refugees anymore. Every place, every inch in the world is someone's property. So when the refugees under duress move out, they have to go to someone else's place, the place which belongs to somebody else. And then the crisis starts because there is no place, and the intention is to return, but the question of security, the question of the ability to sustain economic life, etc., comes in, and that really creates all the problem. There is also the question of humanitarian and as also rights and human rights and other issues. So without much ado, since we do not have much time, we have already planned accordingly, but we have started a little late. So maybe we will eat into the lunchtime slightly, but I'll try to reduce that as far as possible. We'll go straight into the speeches of our very distinguished speakers. First of all, will be Ms. Susan Ree. I hope I have pronounced the name correctly. She is the UNHCR Deputy Representative in Bangladesh. She will start these speeches. Thank you. Ms. Ree.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a very nice, productive day, and I would like to start the session to maybe just explain about the refugees and displacements in the world. So, good afternoon, everyone. As you know, that currently we have 110 million people who are displaced, refugees, stateless people, asylum seekers, etc. And this is a very unfortunate situation we're faced here globally. Now, of this 110 million displaced people and the refugees, 36 million are refugees. So we have 36 million who are refugees, and the top three countries that generate refugees around the world is Afghanistan, Syria, and Ukraine. And that's the situation. And this is 52% of the 36 million refugees around the world. In the meantime, we have about 63 million who are internally displaced persons globally. And we also have those people who are stateless, meaning they don't have any nationality. We have also asylum seekers and also those returnees. So all of them, we have 110 million that we face. So what does it mean by 110 million? This represents 1.3% of the global population. And this is what is evident that we're facing. And every year, we're going to be facing more displacement due to various conflict and also the climate change and other things that was not anticipated. So this is the reality we face here. And I would like to say that majority of these people who are displaced are usually hosted in the neighboring countries. So 70% of these people are living in the neighboring country, which is also the case here in Bangladesh, that you have 1 million Rohingya refugees in the country. But the reality is 72% of them, unfortunately, they're hosted in a very low middle income country globally. So it is those countries who are bearing the brunt of opening their doors and hosting the refugee. So this is where we stand here, and I would like to take this opportunity to highlight this. Now, what is also interesting from the Bangladesh perspective here is Bangladesh is the number 3 country that is most impacted by the climate crisis globally. And this is also another topic that is arising in the international arena, that there is a displacement caused by climate issue. And then 70% of the refugees are living in a country that is impacted by the climate crisis. And 80% of the internally displaced persons are also in this climate-impacted countries as well. So this is just to give you the context. Where do we stand with the refugee crisis, the displacements around the globe entirely? Now, in order to also make sure that we can contribute in providing solution, also financially supporting, and also easing the pressure of the host country who are generously hosting the refugee, there is a global initiative around that is happening. In October, in Bangkok, we're going to have an October meeting that focuses on the Rohingya issues. looking at how we can look at the solutions, the resilience, and also provide the humanitarian assistance, and how this can lead up to Global Refugee Forum. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to share what is a Global Refugee Forum. This has been initiated in 2019 by UNHCR, taking note that many of the countries have been hosting the refugee and they're bearing the brunt. So this is an initiative to do a burden sharing, a responsibility sharing of how can the international community and everyone can come and provide pledges in various forms to assist and lessen the burden of the host country, and also to find solutions for those who have been displaced. So this is an initiative that is happening globally. So following the 2019, the first Global Refugee Forum that was hosted in Geneva, there's going to be a second follow-up meeting in 2023 in Geneva in December, where heads of state and the ministerial level have been invited to talk about the issues on refugee, more on international burden sharing, responsible sharing to those host countries who are impacted by this crisis. So this is the global initiative that is happening from UNHCR side to address the displacement issue, the refugee crisis around the world. So this is what we're doing. But I would like to also maybe turn the page to look at more concretely what is happening in Bangladesh side to maybe give more context here. So UNHCR had been involved in Bangladesh since 1970s, when you were also displaced with when you were seeking independence from Pakistan. So we were here from the 1970s. We were here in the 1990s when there was a refugee influx coming from Myanmar, and the recent influx in 2017 and onward. We have been here, so we are working with the humanitarian actors and the community to assist 1 million refugees here, and they are impacted. And they are hosted in the Cox's Bazar area, the district area, and the Teknaf district area. And then with the government also providing the 2,500 hectares in the natural reserve of hosting this refugee. So with the assistance and generosity from the host government and also the donors, and our humanitarian agency and sister agency, we have been assisting the refugee in this aspect. But now we're entering the 7th year of this Rohingya crisis. Now it has become a protracted crisis. In a protracted crisis, how can we sustain the support is going to be a key issue. So on that note, we're looking at how can we look at addressing the solution part, but in the meantime, knowing the humanitarian funding is also decreasing in this context, how can we bolster the resilience of the refugee? Because at the end of the day, refugees also need to sustain themselves. So where can we do that? What can we do? We need to look at how we can invest in education, the skill development, the livelihood aspect, because we need to make sure they can also sustain themselves while we're seeking solution on various forms on repatriation, third country resettlement, on the complementary pathway. So these are the various efforts that we're doing in this effort for refugees in Bangladesh. But on the climate perspective, because Bangladesh is impacted by the climate as well, the refugees are lying, there are 33 camps in the Cox's Bazar district, is in an area that is very prone to cyclone and flooding and everything. So we need to also look at how to address the refugees, that they can live in a sustainable manner, that's not impacted by too much by the flooding, but also making sure they are aware of climate disaster prevention and mitigation measure and how to respond to emergency things. So those are the things that our collective effort is being put into to address the issue, but also looking at how can we address the deforestation that had been caused by the refugee when they were first here, because they were burning 900,000 kilograms of fire on a daily basis for their cooking fuel. But we at the humanitarian community intervened here to provide what is called a new Say Plus initiative to address and provide cleaner access of fuel by giving them the LPG, but also the reforestize the area, and also looking at some of those resilient agriculture initiatives that can address some of the things. And by doing that, we have mitigated and reduced the carbon emission by 400,000 tons in the vicinity, and also make sure that we could create a greener environment in the refugee camp. Because in 2017 and 18, when they came, the camp environment was a lunar landscape, but now with the initiative, it has to be greened, and also we're continuing to ensure that humanitarian assistance is given. But all of this cannot be sustained without all the burden sharing and the responsibility sharing from every front, from the international community, the humanitarian actors, etc. So on that note, the meeting that we're having in the lead up to the Global Refugee Forum is going to be very important to highlight the plight of the refugees, but also to garner the multi-stakeholder pledges everywhere. So I've been given notice, I only have 46 seconds, so I just want to take this opportunity that we need to do a collective effort here to address the plight and ease the pressure and the burdens of the host government, and also the other international community to come step forward in pledging for solution, financial support and at various fronts in this time. But I think we have the donors, as well as the private sector, the academia, who will be all coming in to chip in here to provide the support on this refugee and the displacement issue globally. So over to you.
Thank you. So, sorry we had to actually interrupt because we have a time constraint. Very quickly we go to Karan Smith, Professor of Leiden University of South Africa. Ms. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I just want to start by thanking Zillur and CGS for inviting me to this conference. I've learned so much about Bangladesh over the last 2 days, and I'm really happy to be speaking on the last day, actually, because when I now look out into the audience, I see friendly faces of people that I've had the privilege to meet over the last 2 days, including many, many inspiring students, most of whom are sitting towards the back of many of the universities in Dhaka. So it's really been a tremendously enriching experience, so thank you for that. I'd like to actually pick up from where the previous speaker ended, and that is this question of responsibility. Because while this session here today is about refugees, for me it also raises the broader question of responsibility. And this conference over the last 2 days has actually touched on a wide range of global governance challenges. But for me, the underlying question, or the challenge really, is this question of responsibility. Who's responsible for tackling these challenges? And are all actors equally responsible? It also raises for me the questions regarding at which level of governance responsibility primarily lies. Does it lie at the local? Does it lie at the national? Does it lie at the regional, or in fact at the global? Now, given my recent role at the UN in relation to the responsibility to protect, I also wanted to tie the question of refugee protection to the notion of the responsibility to protect. Now, by way of brief background, while the responsibility of individual states to protect their own populations has, of course, been a recurrent theme in political theory and forms part of contemporary law on human rights and state responsibility, the idea that the international community might also have a responsibility to protect individuals inside other states, or in fact coming from other states, is more novel and controversial. And this more expansive idea of sovereignty, because that's essentially what it is, was at the heart of the 2001 report on the responsibility to protect. And that, of course, formed the basis of what was agreed during the World Summit in 2005, which was where all UN member states unanimously agreed that they bear a responsibility to protect populations from the crimes of genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Now, unfortunately, much of the debate about, and I'm going to call it R2P for short, so responsibility to protect, a lot of the debate has focused on whether or not, or when, military force can be used to protect populations from atrocity crimes. We know, of course, that states and international organizations have a variety of instruments at their disposal to prevent such crimes in the first place from occurring, or to also respond to their commission. Now, what has been less discussed, and what I want to highlight today, is the potential contribution states can make in preventing atrocity crimes and protecting populations with regards to refugee protection. So this raises for me the question, if populations are seeking protection by fleeing atrocity crimes, does R2P require states to open their borders to receive them? I would argue that in the wake of atrocity situations, facilitating access to asylum, granting temporary protection, and upholding the principle of non-refoulement represent essential steps towards fulfilling the principle of the responsibility to protect. And so, of course, the follow-up question is, if such action is indeed implied by this norm of R2P, are states currently failing in their responsibility to protect? And I leave that question for you to answer. We know that atrocity crimes have continued to generate large numbers of refugees. We've also seen an increase in the use of forced displacement of populations as an object of conflict. The ongoing case of Nagorno-Karabakh is another case in point. And Bangladesh, as has been mentioned, of course, has its own experience with providing refuge for people fleeing from atrocity crimes. As a result of genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya in Myanmar, Bangladesh now, as we know, hosts one of the world's largest populations of refugees. Now, as has been said, refugees depend on the benevolence or goodwill of states for the protection of their rights, and this protection is often not forthcoming. In fact, many states have demonstrated a marked reluctance to open their borders, both in this region, but also elsewhere. And yesterday, actually, there was a panel about ASEAN, and the question that remained unanswered was, where is ASEAN solidarity when it comes to providing refuge to the Rohingya, but also dealing with the situation in Myanmar that caused the refugee crisis in the first place? So the question is, why is Bangladesh, not entirely the only state, but the primary state dealing with this situation? Similarly, in many wealthy developed countries, the disposition to open borders to refugees has been shrinking, and those seeking asylum are being framed as illegitimate or even as criminal. While European states, both individually and as part of the European Union, have been amongst the stronger supporters of the principle of responsibility to protect, we know that R2P for the European Union and for many other states continues to be framed as a foreign policy issue, so something to do outside of their borders. And so in terms of providing protection to refugees fleeing atrocity situations, we know that the EU has not done a very good job. So what can be done to more equitably distribute responsibility for refugee protection among states? Also the question that the previous speaker asked. Now, despite multiple proposals, there is no clear mechanism to systematically, equitably, and predictably allocate responsibilities between states at a global level. It's not yet been agreed. But I'm encouraged by what the previous speaker said, that there are continuous efforts to make this a reality. Because we know that there are two main methods of sharing responsibility, namely the provision of financial and technical assistance to host countries and the admission and physical hosting of refugees. Now, we know, as has been pointed out as well, that wealthier, developed states appear to be much more inclined to provide financial assistance to host countries rather than to accept refugees. At the same time, as the previous speaker also mentioned, due to things like geographic proximity, legal obligations as well, and also inequality among states to prevent refugees from arriving in their territories via, for example, border control measures, we see that around 85% of refugees continue to be hosted by developing states. And we've seen the results of the outsourcing of the physical hosting of refugees. The EU's deal with Turkey, where it essentially provides financial assistance to Turkey in return for Turkey stopping the flow of refugees from places like Syria, Afghanistan, and elsewhere to Europe. And the UK's controversial proposal to essentially ship refugees off to Rwanda. So, of course, this raises difficult questions about how do we make sure that this responsibility is shared more equitably. And I just want to throw out here, because I only have 1 minute left, or now less than a minute, there is this idea of common but differentiated responsibility, which of course we know from climate change negotiations and from environmental law. So one of the questions I have is, should this apply to refugee protection? Another perhaps more controversial idea is that foreign policy culpability might be a criterion for distributing responsibilities to protect refugees. So have particular countries had taken particular foreign policy actions that led to a refugee crisis, and do they therefore bear greater responsibility? Now, I don't have any of the answers, but I look forward to hearing what the rest of the panel and the audience have to say about these questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Smith. Straight we go now to Jan Rolf Zanowski, Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Yes, thank you. I mean, as Karen said, it's always nice. I don't have the answers. Diplomats are supposed to have the answers, but unfortunately, I must say, I probably also don't have all the answers today. First of all, thank you, Zilur. Thank you, CGS, for inviting us again. I think you are really a true brand ambassador for Bangladesh and true patriots doing great work in a challenging environment. We're very happy to partner this time for the first time with CGS on this conference. And I'm very happy to be here. So again, thank you for forfeiting your lunch to listen to us. And thank you for inviting me especially to this very pertinent panel, because obviously migration, refugee policy is a core of our foreign policy in Germany. As Sujin nicely pointed out, we are one of the biggest donors. Multilaterally, we're the second biggest donor in the world, but we are also one of the biggest receiving states of refugees worldwide, depending on which statistics you look at, somewhere between place 4 and 6 in the world. But that doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that we do everything right. As you just pointed out, there's a lot of challenges that start on a very local level. Just yesterday, we had local elections in 2 major German states where far-right populists with very easy answers to all of these difficult questions that we discuss had huge gains. This is a general trend we see in Germany. We are one of the last countries in Europe actually to follow that bad path. Many other countries, unfortunately, already found that migration, easy solutions to these difficult questions lead to easy political gains in the political landscape in Europe, in the EU. So we have a general trend in the EU where our economical situation is not where it's supposed to be. We have huge security challenges at our own borders, what we acutely recognized when Russia illegally and brutally invaded Ukraine roughly 600 days ago. And refugees in such situations where there's not a lot of money going around, where people are frightened, are obviously always the first victims. And as you, Karen, again said rightfully, sovereignty is a cherished principle by all nation states. It is something you don't give up easily, and in the EU, for example, while we have unified policies on trade and many other areas, of course, migration, the right to who you want to let into your country and who you want to let stay in your country, this is a core issue for many of the member states that they are not letting go of. And so the ongoing discussions about the asylum compromise, about a unified EU migration policy are very, very difficult and ongoing. So again, no easy solutions there. And how complicated our interconnected world gets, you see when somebody like Elon Musk criticizes your own foreign minister. We had this a few days ago where he criticized Germany for financing rescue operations in the Mediterranean Sea. I must say, the foreign ministry, I am very proud of what we're doing. It is not the solution to the topic, but it is the second best solution to the situation we are facing in the Mediterranean. There are, this year alone, close to 3,000 people who already verified have died in the Mediterranean on their journey towards the European Union, and our part that we are playing in rescuing these people out of their situation saves lives. So we immediately, of course, tweeted back and wear this as a badge of honor. Our new progressive coalition in Germany, consisting of Social Democrats, of Liberals, and the Green Party, wants to go further and wants to address the core roots of what we are seeing in Europe and worldwide now. This is why we are very much engaged in climate change. Thank you, Sujin, for pointing out that this is one of the main drivers of the migration pressures we see in the world. And another point that we are focusing on is women. With our feminist foreign policy and our feminist development policy, we try to address the core roots of conflict worldwide. In so many countries around the world, and Irfan will talk about it very prominently, of course, in Afghanistan, leaving out women of the process, it what aggravates conflicts, what makes situation worse and adds additional pressures. So from addressing these root causes, women have to be, because they're the main victims, but they're also because they're the main stakeholders in this process, they have to be in the process, and Germany has done a lot on this in the last 2 years. Internally, we've strengthened our preview mechanisms, our preparedness. I think the UN is quite happy that we, as are one of the donors that gives flexible funding, multiple year funding increasingly. It's difficult, but we are doing that. And that leads, unfortunately, to a situation where Germany is not everywhere visible. When you visit the Rohingya camps, there's not a German flag at every point where we have an intervention going, but we are there. And as I said, the security threat is close to our borders. 1,000 kilometers from our own borders, a brutal war is raging, and we will support Ukraine as long as it lasts, but not forget our responsibility for other situations that might not be in the spotlight as much as the Ukraine situation. At the same time, the Ukraine situation also has shown that burden sharing, taking responsibility, from situation to situation can be different. Different actors come to the forefront. Poland, very reluctant in many other situations, was one of the most welcoming, one of the biggest supporters in taking in Ukrainian refugees. So today, let me just touch, with a view to the limited time, touch on 4 main refugee communities that we are sheltering, that we are engaged in. I could mention many more, of course, including Sudan, Yemen, all of these other conflicts. Syria was, I think, the point where we woke up really in Germany. That was a long time ago. It feels like an era ago, 2015, 2016. As in so many situations, I think the government, many people thought this is a temporary thing. We're sheltering them for a few months, maybe 1-2 years, and then they go back to their country. On the height of this crisis, we had 1.1 million Syrian refugees, and still more than 800,000 of them are in Germany. And unfortunately, high hopes for employment, for education, have not fruitioned fully. So I think there was a lot of thinking on how to do it properly for the next time. Unfortunately, the next time came in a very different shape when Afghanistan fell. And obviously, with our big engagement in Afghanistan over the last 20, 30 years, we had a huge responsibility to protect the people who worked for us, the people that we encouraged to find new avenues to engage in activities such as journalism, especially, again, women. And we are still grappling with the situation. Again, no easy solutions. We have taken more than 30,000 people that we worked with in Afghanistan into Germany in our special arrangement. And I'm very happy that the EU could agree that with the EU Commission and 12 member states, we're having a huge Team Europe initiative to work for Afghan refugees in neighboring countries to address the situation. With Ukraine, it's a completely different situation. There are direct borders to the EU, basically direct borders to the EU, very easy to get in. Mostly women, mostly children that we took in, and 80% of them were sheltered in houses, in private houses. Only 8% of them are in refugee facilities. It's a complete different situation to address, so we had to learn yet again how to deal with this situation. And again, it's an ongoing process, but I think we were this time more open to for letting them directly into education, into employment, into also the social systems, direct access, and I hope this is an example that will others will follow upon. But in general, again, let me summarize, we have 11 million foreigners living in Germany. This is 14% of our population. Imagine Bangladesh taking up 24 million foreigners from across the world and trying to integrate them into a society from very different cultures and religions, it's a huge challenge. With a view to the time, unfortunately for Bangladesh, I only have a few words of thanks. Of course, we are one of the biggest donors, of one of the biggest actors here also on the Rohingya response. Bangladesh is also one of the biggest destinations for illegal migration in the EU. It is the 5th biggest origin country for illegal migration in the EU. At the same time, we're also opening avenues for legal migration through an EU program called the Talent Partnership for skilled workers, for young people to qualify themselves, go through the safe routes into the EU. So this is an ongoing process we have with the Bangladesh government, while we're also addressing the Rohingyas that Bangladesh so thankfully is sheltering for many years. With all the pressures we have in the country, this is ongoing. Germany has spent more than 300 million euros on this response here in Bangladesh. We're here to stay. Again, Ukraine is not influencing our budget here. Just this year, when our Federal Humanitarian Commissioner visited, Sujin was there, we announced additional support of 12.5 million, and we will stay here and work on many, many different areas, including in small numbers resettlement issues that I think is one of the new big areas. But as Sujin also said, non-traditional donors have to step up. The private community has to step up. There has to be more creative ways of getting funding, of addressing these issues. The Bangladesh government, I would love for them to be a little bit more flexible in our dialogue on a few issues that we already mentioned, skill building, education. This is very important for us, for our headquarters, for a sustainable response here, and we'll keep in close dialogue with the host government, with all the actors on this, and with this I would maybe conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janowski. Our next speaker is Irfan Ia. He is the founder and managing director of Afghanistan Security Institute, Canada. Mr. Ia.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking CGS not only for inviting us and organizing this flagship event, but also for keeping the refugee crisis on the top of its agenda. Thank you. Let me briefly, analyze how does a particular portion of the refugee crisis look in real life. Just a month ago, earlier in November, Pakistan announced that all Afghan refugees must leave Pakistan, otherwise they will be forcefully, deported. And the consequences of this event can be very severe. Afghanistan, which is already going through a severe crisis, where people, like out of 40 million people, 30 million people need urgent humanitarian assistance. On top of this, the government of Pakistan are asking the refugees to leave their country. First of all, there will be no places, at least safe place for Afghan refugees in Afghanistan to be fed or given shelter. And this is a huge challenge. And I must say that Islamabad accused Afghanistan for the security situation in Pakistan. But I think Pakistan does not realize that it is the militant in Pakistan who are inspired by the rise of Taliban. And they are, following the similar footsteps that Afghan Taliban did. And then they see that if Afghan Taliban can defeat the US and the Western world, they can certainly defeat Pakistani state and establish a Sharia law. And TTP, or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, I'm sure you must be familiar with, has taken their inspiration from Afghan Taliban, and they are expanding their activities and their influence in Pakistan. So whenever there is a security incident, a bomb blast, Pakistan, without investigating, accused that it is Afghan Taliban or Afghan refugees. And therefore, all Afghan must leave the country. I think this is not a solution for the security of Pakistan, because Pakistan cannot treat Afghanistan just like, let's say, a very far country, or European country, because these two countries have a very deep history and connection. And the border region to which we call the Devon line is just one region which was divided by Britisher, just, I'm not sure still on which basis, because the people who live there are Pashtun mostly. They share one culture, one religion, one language. And when Afghan refugees migrated to Pakistan in early 1980s, they intermixed with those people. They got married into each other communities. So for example, today there will be almost in every Pashtun family, you will see people or their relatives living in Pakistan. And on the other hand, they will be having family members in Afghanistan. But because of these visa sanctions and border restrictions, if something happens, let's say a mother loses its daughter who is married in Pakistan, she is not able to get visa to go and see her body, and vice versa. So this has made the life of Afghan refugee very, very difficult. And unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we don't have good health facilities, not to speak of education. And when people who need critical care, they want to go for treatment to Pakistan, they cannot, simply because they cannot get visas. So these are some of the issues, that look on the ground. And if this thing happen in reality, that they are forced, so Afghans who have been in Pakistan for 40 years, they have to wrap up their entire life within 1 month. And it's almost impossible. So again, as I say, this is not the long-term solution. And if we look to the causes of refugees, as my colleagues mentioned, it's the climate change and conflict. But I think the man-made conflict, is the key driver of refugees. If we look at Sudan, Venezuela, Colombia, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and even Myanmar, all these people are driven by security conflict. And UNHCR and the donors countries, they are doing their best to mitigate those crises. But to prevent these crises from taking place in the first place should be long-term solution. How states can, let's say, not use or misuse refugees or any other strategies, for their proxy wars or their evil ambitions. And let me clearly mention here that, yes, there might be some Afghan refugees who were involved, in some security incidents in Pakistan. But it's also a reality when Afghan refugees went to Pakistan, at that time, thanks to, the notorious dictator, General Zia-ul-Haq, who wanted to be, the leader of Islamic world, and he established a vast number of Islamic seminaries. And Afghan refugees who could not afford schools, or food, they send their children to those madrasas where they were given free literacy and food. And in those madrasas, they were radicalized so that they can be used against their foreign enemies, or to expand the Islamic influence to states such as Central Asia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and all those countries. And then, with the support of even Western world, they came into the front foot and also supported that strategy or project of Pakistan so that they can defeat Russians. But they were not realizing that, radicalizing people can come at one day to hunt your own people, and they are suffering the pain today. A lot of incidents that are taking place in Pakistan can be rooted back from those 1980s, Islamic militancy. So all these things, when countries or states use, evil methods to achieve their foreign interests, can one day, backlash on them. So unfortunately, it's both the Pakistani people and Afghanistani people who are suffering, the pain. And I must say that women and children are on the forefront in Afghanistan. As my colleague mentioned, women have been discriminated, unfortunately. And they are totally dependent on, their men. And if their men are unemployed or, God forbid, died, they left with no support at all. So this has not only effect on Afghan society as a whole, but on the neighboring countries. So again, just for the sake of time to summarize, we must, especially the international community and the great powers, focus on the root causes of refugee crisis. I'll conclude. Thank you for reminding. Focus on the refugee crisis, and once those root causes are addressed, it will significantly reduce the refugee crisis on the world and reduce the burden on the state that they are dealing with. But again, just finishing on the last sentence, be it Ukrainian refugees, Yemen, Syrian, Myanmaris, whoever they are, it's the people who are at the receiving end, and the politicians are, those at higher level will hardly see any, the real life consequences or impact. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Ria. So our last speaker is our very own Raja Devashish Roy. Devashish Roy, please. Screen is yes, of course you can.
Thank you very much, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists. No doubt, like many others here, I am equally concerned with the large refugee crises enveloping Europe, many other parts of the world, and closer home, the Rohingya crisis that Bangladesh is bearing with support from many friends. Now, but I wish to actually speak about something else. But let me just say a few remarks about the Rohingya issue. One, it has implications on Chittagong Hill Tracts, which borders Cox's Bazar. So we have received Rohingya refugees even from earlier movements. Two, I wish to put a caveat of involvement of arms among some of the Rohingya. We have to be very careful about that. Thirdly, I think this is partly a diplomatic failure as a nation, as a people in Bangladesh. As a Bangladeshi, I would say. Before the Rohingya crisis happened, we had one of the best bilateral relations in the history of Bangladesh-Myanmar relations. And we had an ambassador from the Chittagong Hill Tracts, Major General Anup Kumar Chakma, longest serving Bangladeshi ambassador in Rangoon. I went along with Professor Anisuzzaman. He has left the world today, along with others, Anu Muhammad, Professor Meghna Guha Thakurta, to try to do civil society contacts with the Burmese, as well as the Rohingya, as well as others. But I don't know how much result there was, but we need to keep on doing such things. Now, coming back to the Chittagong Hill Tracts, I want to sort of widen the canvas and share with you some of the lesser known stories of unrecognized refugees in Bangladesh, including we had 70,000 indigenous persons who were given refuge in India, and they were repatriated to Bangladesh in 1996-97 with an agreement between the refugees and the government of Bangladesh. And in fact, there is a task force on refugees and internally displaced persons created by the government of Bangladesh, where we, circle chiefs, we are the traditional chiefs, have been inducted into the task force. We are grateful to the government for that. And we are dealing with the unresolved issues of the former India returned refugees, as well as internally displaced persons. They are indigenous people, although there was some discussion of including non-indigenous or ethnic Bengali people under the definition of IDPs. I do not see how that can be done in the terms of the CHT Accord of 1997. So Bangladesh actually is quite ingenious in creating institutions, bodies to deal, including with refugees and internally displaced persons. There is a task force, and there is, like, for example, with land conflicts, there is a commission. But I think walking the walk, talking the talk is much easier. Where walking the walk is concerned, I think we haven't done so well. But why do I bring all these issues in? Because the thing is that the after effects, they have impacts on today. There were Chakma refugees affected by the Kaptai Dam of General Field Marshal Ayub Khan of the 1960s, who are still in Arunachal Pradesh, stateless. The Indian Supreme Court says they must be given citizenship, but they have not procured documents. They are creating conflicts. There are conflicts with the indigenous people of Arunachal on the Tibet-China border. Now, there are also refugees returned from India, indigenous persons, the hill tracts, who have not been recognized by the government. India and Bangladesh are not parties to the Convention on Refugees, as far as I am aware. And so this creates problems. There are even recently some indigenous people have gone across the border into Mizoram, India, and into Chin and Rakhine states. And unfortunately, the whole dynamics of Burma are very little understood by the government machinery of Bangladesh. We need to understand our neighbors more, but we are not. So these are some of the issues which will have serious implications for development. The Road and Belt Initiative from Rakhine State to Mizoram, further on to China from Myanmar, all this trade, stability will be affected. Second, the Chittagong Hill Tracts at the hinterland of Chittagong Port, the river Karnataka, and the deforestation and some of the conflicts, unfortunately, even artificially created armed conflicts in the Chittagong Hill Tracts are leading to such that Bangladeshi indigenous people are leaving Chittagong Hill Tracts for Myanmar and India. On the other side too, there were some Indian indigenous persons who have taken refuge in Bangladesh too, small number, from the northeast. So these northeast Indian states and Chittagong Hill Tracts, very similar constitutional and political history. Same with the Upper Burma, Kachin, Shan, Rakhine, Chin, shares very, very similar constitutional and administrative history. So you had chiefs like us, we had separate regulations, and in fact, up to now, the Chittagong Hill Tracts has a special regulation similarly to neighboring Mizoram and Nagaland and other states. Now, coming back to some of the things that Professor Smith has mentioned, the right to protect. So I think that's really, really important, where development partners who are the hosts, who are supporting this conference itself, and how we can create situations where we can prevent such crisis level development problems, conflict, poverty, arising to the state that, one, it leads to internal displacement. Now, the United Nations guidelines on internal displacement, I don't know how many people are aware about that. There is a special rapporteur on internally displaced persons. But this is linked to refugees, not always, but in many cases this is linked. And we have, as I said, this task force in Chittagong Hill Tracts on refugees and internally displaced persons. And I think the task force has a lot to learn from the speakers at this conference. Let me take this opportunity to thank CGS, Zillur Bhai, and the fellow panelists. It's been an amazing opportunity for me, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Devashish Roy, for being so crisp. And I didn't have to even ask you that you have 1 minute. You finished on time. Thank you. Sorry. In fact, we have had an extremely distinguished panel, and who have really enlightened us on these issues. The thing is that the area is too vast, and I'm sure each of them had much more to say, but because of the time constraint, it could not be done. And many more areas could be touched, which could not be touched actually because of the time constraint. And, we always leave on time constraint. What we will do now is that I'll open the floor for some questions. Since it says only 7 minutes, 8 minutes left, but we'll go a little beyond that. We'll take 3 or 4 questions, and then I'll ask the panelists each to take about 2 minutes time to answer or add their views on that. Let us start with the lady there. Is there a microphone somewhere?
I am ready here, Mr. Moderator.
Oh.
Mr. Moderator.
Please identify yourself and pose the question. Oh. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Very brief, please.
Okay. We know that refugee crisis is a worldwide crisis, and as a young guy, and my question is, whether is it possible to build a world, to refugee-free world, and whether it is possible to reduce this crisis, and what is your message to as a young guy and to young generation, what is your message that whether it is possible and what we can do for a refugee-free world, to make a refugee-free world? Thank you.
Okay.
Well, assalamu alaikum. My question is mainly to the representatives of Germany. Well, all the organizations and many countries are engaged to increase the good environment of these refugee conditions. But are they working enough to put pressure politically to those countries to inhibit the refugee conditions? Thank you.
Thank you. I am Monjirul Amin from Eastern University. My question is, from a communal point of view of developing...
Please be close to the mic so that we can listen to you.
Hello. From a communal point of view, a developing country like Bangladesh, who is known for its prime facie for refugee, Rohingya refugee, and it often causes conflict about this. My question is how the refugee could be returned back, or what will be their future? What will be your suggestion over the resolve such dilemma as an expertise? Thank you.
Hello, this is Ashik Baljishat. I'm pursuing... Hello, I am Ashik Baljishat. I am pursuing my undergrad degree at the University of Dhaka, and my question is, over years, European countries are shifting and tightening migration policies to hold the flow of refugees and asylum seekers from Asia and Africa, especially the far-right leaders in East Europe, West Europe, Italy, or even Nordic countries, which used to be the most welcoming nations, now are on the way to blockade the refugee flow. So they are trying to formulate policies like one nation, one culture. So my question is, what are the latent reasons behind this kind of mindset, especially for the far-right leaders? Thank you.
Hello everyone. I would like to ask a question to the Karen Smith ma'am. You mentioned that about the war crime, genocide and ethnic cleansing against many refugees, but I have a question specifically Rakhine state. The jurisdiction which is fall in the ICC, but the Myanmar is not a state party of the Myanmar. So what the remedies will we get from this kind of refugees? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm sure, anyway, let me introduce myself. I'm Mahbubur Rahman. I teach political science at North-South University. Mr. Moderator, I hope you will agree with me. We Bangladeshis are tired of hearing appreciation for Rohingya issue. All we need is now repatriation. Appreciation is enough. And we had a session just before this where 4 ambassadors were here. And none of them, actually all of them appreciated Bangladesh for giving the shelter for the Rohingya refugees. But none of them addressed repatriation issue. My question to Professor Karen Smith, in light with R2P, because you were there in the United Nations, you were an advisor to this. R2P was meant for actually addressing this issue, this kind of issue. As a principle, R2P is very much for this, but in reality, why we see a different practice? What happened with Libya and other countries, R2P was utilized there. But when it comes to Rohingya issue, why R2P is not utilized here? And in line with this, my question to you is that the third pillar of R2P, where Ban Ki-moon actually articulated, and if this does not apply to Rohingya issue, then where else it will be used? And in line with this, what is your personal observation and your thoughts about this, how we can materialize it? Thank you very much.
Hello. May I ask a question?
No. Well, this will be the last question. Okay,
sure.
Go ahead.
So my question is about the rise in authoritarianism in many countries all over the world, including Europe, and which has led to many authoritarian leaders gaining in popularity by bashing the refugees and the rise in refugees. This has resulted in refugees facing racism and a growing distrust among those countries, the host countries, and the people of these host countries not really liking the refugees. So how do you go about solving the situation if possible, and how do you deal with this rising authoritarianism?
I think it's well taken. Thank you. That's all. We cannot take any more questions. I'll now request the speakers. We start from that last end with Mr. Janowski.
Yeah, great question. As if you have already predicted what was the part of my initial talk that I missed because of the time constraints. Let me address your questions in two different areas. The one is the technicalities on the refugee topic. What we need, accountability. This is why Germany is party to the trial, the Gambia against Myanmar, to document the crimes that were committed and to hold people responsible. There are several cases in German courts also, according to the principle of universal jurisdiction, that try to bring to justice perpetrators of crimes, of the root causes that all of our speakers here today addressed. The second one, I think I already alluded to it, integration for the time being, because you cannot bet that these people will go home in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. We see what is happening in the Middle East in the last few days. There are refugee situations that are not solved even after decades. So you have to prepare people in the meantime to either contribute to the host societies or prepare them for when they go back for making better their situations in their original countries. So you have to invest in refugees while they are sheltered in your countries. And of course, the political work has to be done to ensure the conditions to return. But what is the solution? Just push back people over the border into these situations where they have fled from? This is not the solution. In the German case, I just told you, Ukraine, Syria, Sudan, we have Afghanistan. We have to work together with Assad, Putin, and the Taliban to find solutions. It's not an easy task. It can only be done by incremental initiatives. We have clear values that we fight for in Afghanistan. We do nothing against women. We are only engaged where women are part of the process and where the women are the beneficiaries. And if the Taliban refuse to talk about that, then that's it. We have to also stand up for our own values sometimes. And at home, we have to fight disinformation and narratives. This is also true for Bangladesh. A lot of what is said about the Rohingyas is disinformation. There are certain quarters that are interested in spreading false information about refugee communities for political gains domestically. We also have to address that. And then we come to the second base, which is the global governance. I mean, you're absolutely right. We need a better working UN system. We need a reformed UN Security Council. This is what Germany is working for decades now, because the world order as we have it now is not equitable for everybody. It's sure, we all agree this, including the developed countries, including the bigger countries. But the solution cannot be to just tear down the existing rules-based order like Putin is doing it, like others are attempting it. the false promise of multipolarity is sometimes a little bit a dangerous hope that some people might have. This is the most dangerous time when this new order is being built. And for this, we need proper institutions. We need working international institutions, multilateral agencies, and a proper global governance. And that can address all of these other questions that you just posed. Thank you.
Well, I have nothing specific, but just to add on this global crisis questions, I think there is volume of research, even policy-oriented research, how to solve this issue. But politics is a nasty game, sometimes very unpredictable. And implementation of those policies itself is a huge challenge. So it's not easy to, right away or overnight solve the issue. But definitely it can be improved, especially if there is international enhanced cooperation, if even a politician taken into more humane approach rather than just waging war for their own national interest. It may be a little bit too optimistic, but probably this is the only solution. Thank you.
I think many of the participants have raised a very interesting question here, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for your interest. And I think one of the things I would like to address here is on the solution part, on the repatriation, and what is the way forward. I mean, repatriation has to be done in a voluntary, safe, and sustainable manner. So meaning that the root causes have to be addressed, and the condition has to be conducive. If the root causes are not addressed, the refugee will be returned in a situation where they're in the same situation. They need to be given access to basic services like the healthcare, the education, the livelihood opportunity, the land issue. Their documentation has to be resolved, and also their pathway to the citizenship have to be also addressed, because these are the reasons why they have fled the country. And they have been persecuted. So those issues needs to be addressed, and the international community needs to come in together to provide the political solution, because this is not a solution that can be addressed by one entity. It is a multi-fold solutions approach that we need to address this. But in the meantime, refugees needs to be having access. They need to also bolster their resilience. They need to sustain themselves. We need to also look into the resilience part here. How can they build up their capacity, their education, their livelihood opportunity? Without addressing that, this creates another problem, because you cannot have a population that is not productive or idle. Those who have the skills and the livelihood have a better chance of really sustaining themselves, or when they go back to Myanmar, to successfully integrate into the society. If they're given chance to go to another country, that means they have a better chance to integrate in that third country. And also, while they're here, they need to sustain themselves. You cannot have a population that is not able to support themselves. So all the more important that we need to invest in education, resilience, and skill development. Now, as an international community and all of us, how can we ensure our support for solution? This is why we need to say that this is not a one entity problem. It is all of society approach here. You all have to be also part of the solution here to also understand what this is. We need to mitigate the hate speech, the misinformation, and disinformation against the refugees. But also, we hope that all the states, the private sectors, the UN agency, the donor community, and the non-traditional, everyone, to be coming forward and coming with the burden sharing and the responsibility sharing. And hopefully, in Geneva in December, the Global Refugee Forum will provide the platform for that.
Thank you, Ms. Ri.
Thank you. On the Rohingya issue, amongst other things, I think somebody mentioned repatriation. So we need to really look at, amongst other things, the Kofi Annan report, I think. And anyway, the conditions that the Myanmar government agreed to. Let's start with agreed. But as well as we have to serious look at the citizenship laws and other conditions that the Rohingya refugees have given with regard to their repatriation, so that if you could actually start a pilot phase or something of repatriation. And the other thing I want to say is Chittagong is the area. I can understand 90% of Rohingya language because the Chittagonian dialect language, whatever. And this is not being used sufficiently, the cultural links between Rohingya and Chittagong to understand the Rohingya psyche, to help them repatriate. And lastly, I just want to say that, you know, somebody mentioned the ICC. As a long-term student of human rights, international human rights law just has no teeth. Even if Myanmar were to ratify ICC, there's still huge loopholes in getting international human rights law to push a country to accept. But I'm not saying that don't give up. Let's get on to that and use international human rights and national. Thank you.
Just if I can quickly add one sentence, just, okay, 30 seconds. I think Bangladesh should also learn from Pakistan in managing the Afghan refugees, because when Afghan refugees came to Pakistan, they were not at all registered, most of them. And Pakistan is now seeing the consequences. So what Bangladeshi policymakers should take in consideration to have them all registered, because in long term, it's going to be very difficult to manage them, be it from security perspective or immigration issue. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you so much. I think the last two questions were essentially about the situation in Myanmar relating to the ICC, but also the question about the difference with Libya. Now, it's a very long answer, so I'm happy to speak to you during the break. I will just briefly say, I think that the situation in Myanmar highlights the limitations of existing global governance and the multilateral system, in the sense that we've already heard about the limitations of the ICC, so that's the one thing. But on the other hand, of course, the military option, so the third pillar of RTP, I think is, for now and for the foreseeable future, it's off the table, and that's partly as a result of Libya, but also because of the dynamics in the Security Council. And of course, China would never have authorized any kind of military action in Myanmar. And so again, I think the question goes back to what was the international community doing before? Because of course, it didn't come as a surprise, right, that there would be a genocide against the Rohingya. And I think the main failure was that the international community was focusing on the democratic transition and was not paying attention to the red flags that were indicating that there was a very, very high risk of genocide against the Rohingya and other ethnic minorities. So that, for me, was the big failure. But happy to speak to you during the break. And I just wanted to end on a positive note, because I liked the first question. Is it possible to build a refugee-free world? And some of us might think, well, that's an idealistic kind of question. Well, of course, it means it would have to be a world without conflict. It would have to be a world without poverty, perhaps a world without borders, right? And we might think it's idealistic, but that should not mean that we should not stop trying. So I just want to say that, especially to young people, all of the things we discuss here, it sounds like, we have a lot of problems on our hands, and we do. But we have to keep trying to address them. Thank you very much.
May I just seek one clarification here? Yeah, just one clarification with the remark from my colleague next door. Just to let you know, Bangladesh government and UNHCR, we do registration for all here in Bangladesh. So I just wanted to allay that concern. Yeah.
Thank you. It has been a really very illuminating session. And as I said that we have a very distinguished panel who gave us a lot of information and a lot of insight into the issues. I will not try to sum up, because that is not, in the first place, not possible. Secondly, we don't have the time. A few things have come up which has, I think what Ms. Smith finally said is very important. Then, even if it is ideal world, we have to look towards that. Unless we aim very high, we don't achieve much. So let us look to that. But the current problems, another issue she has mentioned is that much of it comes from conflicts. And unless conflicts are resolved, the situation cannot be improved. Say the Palestinian issue, for example, for 3/4 of a century it is there, the conflict has not been resolved, so the Palestinian issue goes on, and we know what has happened in the last 2 days. The occupation is the reason of the conflict, and unless the occupation ends, conflict will not end. Unless conflict ends, the situation will not end. Here, I think the international community, I'm not speaking about Palestine only, on all these issues, the international community has to come together, again being a little bit ideal, has to come together to resolve these issues, so that we do not see these millions and millions of people being put into this inhuman situation. Thank you so much for listening to us, and to the, let us give a big hand to the panel.
Thanks to all speakers and moderators. No doubt we have enjoyed an insightful session. Now I would like to request all speakers and our moderator, please stand for a group photo session. Speakers and moderators, kindly please stand for a group photo session. And dear guests, your lunch is served at outside of ballroom. And kindly